Hobel #1, Destruction Derby 2, Crash Bandicoot. I could go on.
I am an anti-Spyro activist!
Back in the good old PlayStation days, there was this notorious publisher in Europe known as Midas Interactive Entertainment. They were best known for their Pocket Price lineup, consisting of various budget titles and your typical shovelware garbage. With a repertoire that includes bargain bin racing games and several Dingo Pictures joints, I'm sure you can understand why Midas would have a less than positive reputation among fans of the original PlayStation. So when met with their garish signature artwork slapped on a case, it makes sense why someone would react with a groan, no matter what the actual game is like.
Whoa, this looks great! Oh no it doesn't.
This is Future Racer, originally released in Japan as Defeat Lightning in 1997. It's a fast-paced mech combat racing game where you have to capture and hold a ball while outmaneuvering your opponents to score points. It's a fun and pretty unique alternative to the contemporaries F-Zero or Wipeout, and if nothing else, I'd say it stands out in Midas's catalog as somewhat exceptional. A certified hidden gem, if you will. But when approached with the expectations of yet another bargain basement game from a trash publisher, I don't think it's unreasonable to imagine that someone would have their perspective skewed in a more negative direction from the moment they press the power button. That no matter how good it might be, it's still just another Midas game.
Yeah, it's another Midas racing game.
Midas would go on to publish other Japanese titles such as the colorful puzzle game Star Sweep and the stylishly hectic shooter Samvane. Some fantastic gems that otherwise never would have seen the light of day in Europe. But with Midas's reputation, the cheap price and covers like this, I have to wonder how many people have looked at these titles less favorably, haven't given them as much of a chance as other games, or have written them all off entirely because they happen to hang out in a crowd of low-grade rubbish. It's interesting to think about how our preconceived notions, our established understandings, could inform our perspectives so much, making a shining gem like Future Racer appear to be anything but. Anyway, let's talk about Spyro the Dragon. After their first attempt to hit it big ended as a commercial failure with the derivative first-person shoot-'em-up Disruptor, Insomniac Games would finally strike gold with 1998's Spyro the Dragon. Often ranked among the PlayStation's most popular titles, this 3D platformer had it all, baby! Over 30 open-ended levels to explore, 14,000 splangos to collect, and a sting-free soundtrack to keep you company. Essentially, everything you need to plaster on an advert in your typical 90s video game mag. In execution, Spyro the Dragon is driven by a structural simplicity and a gracefully fluid moveset that sees the young dragon elegantly zigzagging around the sprawling levels. Not so much completing missions, but rather collecting everything in sight. This lends the adventure a snappy pace and zen-like peacefulness that is still easy to fall in love with to this very day. With its colorful characters and fantastical dreamscapes, it's no wonder that the Purple Rascal would take his place as one of the generation's greatest platforming dudes, together with Crash Bandicoot, Super Mario the 64th, and of course, Gex, the registered sex offender.
Hey, I feel like I'm trapped in Boy George's pants.
Suffice to say, Spyro the Dragon is a certified classic, and with that comes a storied legacy. Spyro would go on to star in many future games, becoming an icon of its era His fond memory left an impression. It's a childhood darling of many, a game that they can return to over and over again to feel its warmth, like the soft embrace of an old friend. Perhaps somewhat unsurprisingly, I grew up with the Spyro games as well, and they never really left me. Every now and then you just have to boot up some Spyro for an hour or two or free of casual entertainment. It's inevitable. We all do it. However, you can only keep replaying a favorite so much before it becomes too familiar, before we take it for granted. There is undoubtedly novelty in spicing up an old classic. We crave that variety, to make it a little bit new again. What better remedy then than an alternative version of Spyro the Dragon that I had never played before? Something vaguely similar but decidedly different from what I grew up with. This intrigued me enough to import this elusive treat from the other side of the world. The Japanese version of Spyro the Dragon was released in April 1999, about half a year after the Western release. And straight from the get-go, the vast differences make themselves apparent. The box art spouted a less pugnacious Spyro, with softer features and a much cuter demeanor. Gone are the crooked eyebrows and the confidently clever smirk, replaced by big puppy dog eyes and the sweetest of smiles. That doesn't mean that he is entirely devoid of all attitude though. Spyro is still an archetypical, spunky, mischievous kid, in the same vein as many other Japanese cartoon children. And fittingly voiced by Akiko Jajima, who also played Shin-chan at the time. Beyond the Japanese voice work and written text though, the most immediately apparent changes to this version would be the in-game camera and Spyro's movement speed. Unlike the original's dynamic camera, the Japanese one is fixed in place, but can easily be rotated with the shoulder buttons and centered with triangle. Spyro's charge attack has also been slowed down significantly and doesn't realign the camera whenever activated. For a longtime Spyro player, it definitely takes some time getting used to. But if you're already proficient with these old 3D adventures, it shouldn't take too long to wrap your head around. While the environments may look the same at first glance, you will soon notice the colorful signs that have been added throughout the levels to provide players with helpful tips and messages. Keen-eyed players may also notice several stages with altered geometry, like these missing towers in Dark Hollow and Dreamweavers, or this arch that has disappeared in Dr. Shemp's home turf, who is actually called Dr. Cool in this version. See? It says it right there. Dokutakuru. If you're not up on your katakana. What's even cooler is that Japanese Spyro also comes with additional features for the Pocket Station, a cute little memory card that doubled as a simple handheld game device, something akin to the Dreamcast's VMU. Slap this bad boy into your console and you'll be able to collect dragonfly eggs in the game that can then be hatched and played with in your pocket-sized PlayStation, and finally transferred back to the main game to give your dragonfly partner new colors and attributes. That's quite a substantial addition. The most important difference, however, is that Spyro yells "Yatta!" every time you collect all the gems in a level. Yatta! At this point, the uninitiated among you may be wondering why we're cliffsnoting the fairly inconspicuous regional differences for an otherwise unassuming platforming game. And that's not a bad question, because at surface level, this all would seem rather benign. For me, this is predominantly a case of sharing my raw passion for something that genuinely intrigues me. While the changes and additions are mostly found in the minute details, I still appreciate having an outside look into an extensive Japanese localization. It's somewhat unprecedented in its scope. Needless to say, I find this piece of video game history to be absolutely fascinating. It's the best kind of peculiar artifact, a pure expression of cultures colliding at Mach speed, pressed onto one single compact disc. This is an arc containing a past that you most likely didn't experience. It's like opening a time capsule and finding the records of a bygone age. All for you to savor at your own leisure. However, while I personally appreciate the pedestrian pace and frivolous fun provided by Spyro's first adventure on the Japanese market, I sadly seem to be in the minority. And that's putting it lightly. Because it turns out that this particular version of Spyro the Dragon is surrounded by controversy and unfavorable opinions. Among Western Spyro fans, it's notoriously infamous for having tampered with a classic. But let's not mince words here. Some people absolutely hate it. If you're unfamiliar with Spyro the Dragon, it may sound bizarre that the differences I just described as quaint and interesting drive others up the metaphorical walls.
What could this sign possibly be telling you? Don't fall off the edge, you'll die. What is your purpose?
In short, they changed it, and now it's bad. Supposedly, Spyro is too slow. The game is condescending and overbearing, even though these guys don't even know Japanese. The camera is incomprehensible. Spyro sounds like a little girl. They even took away the top of this tower for some reason. And all the changes are kind of stupid and dumb and bad. Whether it's big or small YouTubers, if it's in speech or writing, anytime the subject of Japanese Spyro comes up, no one seems able to stop themselves from tearing this game a new asshole in one way or another. Not even the supposedly impartial Cutting Room Floor article could refrain from mentioning how annoying it is to accidentally activate the hint signs scattered throughout the levels. In my experience, it's been hard to even mention that I'm playing this game without at least one person giving their condolences, assuming that I'm suffering while doing so. The strong reactions to this little novelty has always puzzled me. It's not that I'm upset that so many feel the need to express the same negative opinions about it over and over again. That's not really out of the ordinary for games with a harsh reputation. Rather, what truly bothers me is the alarming lack of curiosity. I find it concerning how this sort of remarkably exaggerated disdain often stops us from being even the least bit inquisitive. The anger and resentment makes us lose the interest to explore, interrogate, and learn more, while simple narratives become absolute truth. I have found that this happens all the time when something is deemed unworthy. People get told a lot of supposed facts about it, and then start taking everything for granted. What we already intuitively know to be true is all that we need, and there is no point in digging deeper, because no one cares, and the game is dookie diarrhea anyway. There is no effort to genuinely understand. That might sound harsh, but I mean it. I see unflattering footage of people pretend playing Japanese Spyro without even bothering to leave the first hub world. Everyone's regurgitating the same old talking points, and no one ever stops to ask any real questions. I mean, they are asking questions, but they're all rhetorical ones that aren't meant to be answered. Like, why did they do this? Why did they change it? Were they stupid? Even if there happen to be actual answers, they're usually not investigated or simply dismissed as ridiculous. It is, for example, known trivia, although often unsourced, that the camera and running speed were changed because while playing the international version of Spyro, Japanese playtesters reportedly experienced 3D sickness, or more commonly known as motion sickness. Despite knowing this, some Western players nevertheless seem quick to disregard that information as complete horseshit, a fabrication of reality by evil Sony suits or something.
The only reason I could find as to why all of these changes were made is because when Spyro was showed off to Japan, he moved too fast and caused numerous reports of 3D sickness.
While others are more, let's say, colorful about it.
Why did they decide to change the camera?
I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm kind of retarded.
Based on absolutely nothing, the problem is written off as preposterous. Some express confusion.
They also slowed the charge down because playtesters were reporting on a sickness called 3D sickness? Yeah.
While others talk about it as if motion sickness isn't even a real thing.
For some asinine crown-eating reason, the Japanese localizers of the first Spyro game decided that the country of Formula 1 racing and Sonic the Hedgehog would not be able to handle the somewhat fast-paced nature of this game, claiming that it made them motion sick. So, because these Sony suits were not able to hold their lunch while looking at a couple of moving polygons, they decided the best course of action would be to completely butcher this game for their market.
Of course, downplaying this common medical issue doesn't somehow make it any less real. According to the online health resource Medline Plus, about 1 in 3 people are highly susceptible to motion sickness. And I happen to be one of them. Video games are mostly fine for me, but I can't deal with fast-moving trains, for example. And last year, I got really sick from playing Symphony of the Night on our CRT because of the screen curvature. Yeah, that stuff happens. Coincidentally, Bloodstained also made me feel queasy when trying to run up this spinning tower. I never finished the game because of this, and I even backed it on Kickstarter. Can you believe it? Here's my co-producer Kiki getting nauseous from me playing Spyro the Dragon on stream about 3 years ago.
I'm getting a little bit motion sick. It's very like you
It's
move a lot.
Yeah,
in this
I
game.
think
It spins a lot as well. You know the thing where like the Japanese players got motion sick?
Yeah, that's you.
That's me.
That's you. In fact, Kiki suffers so much from this that she basically can't play any first-person games. Except Jumping Flash, for whatever reason. Point being that it happens to a lot of people and can be triggered in various ways. Spyro the Dragon is a fast-paced game with a camera that violently snaps into place during certain actions, which may cause discomfort. In particular, the free-roaming setup incentivizes players towards scattered movement throughout the levels, making potential disorientation a compounding constant factor. Meanwhile, something as fast as F-Zero X and other racing games may cause no issues at all, while a first-person shooter perspective could quickly turn into barf bag territory from its field of view alone. The causes often lie in the small details, such as camera placement, movement, and frame rate. Most relevant to this video, though, is how research suggests that certain demographics are more susceptible to motion sickness than others. Among them, children and people of Asian descent. As Medline puts it, the reasons for this are still not fully understood by researchers. So, I'm sure you can imagine how this would be quite an interesting conundrum for a Japanese localization team back in 1998 when 3D games were still being figured out. Luckily for us, though, we don't have to imagine. By heading over to the ancient-looking website 0600design.com, we can find the thoughts of Masahito Shimizu, also known as Ropyaku Tsurumi, or Tsurumi 600, who just so happened to be a localizer for Sony Computer Entertainment at the time. On this crusty old webpage, Tsurumi was kind enough to repost all entries of his written column published in Dorimaga. In this particular entry from 2003, Tsurumi gave readers a sneak peek on his then upcoming talk at the Game Developers Conference, which happens to include more insight into this whole Spyro situation. Tsurumi's speech is most likely where this motion sickness factoid originated and can still be found in GDC's archive, although the written version on his website is a bit different, and we'll be focusing on that one. He explains that while playtesting Spyro the Dragon simultaneously in all regions, a significant amount of Japanese players reported experiencing nausea and dizziness. The team tried to find the cause for the issue, but without any reference literature on the subject, they would eventually have to give up. And then comes the question: what could they do about it? There certainly wouldn't be resources for them to conduct their own research on the matter, and it wasn't likely to solve anything. So, they would have been faced with two options. Release the game as is, with the risk of being panned as a nausea simulator in Japanese gaming magazines, or try to alleviate the issue by tweaking the game, just a little bit. The choice can't have been an easy one to make. Knowing this, it's fair to say that the thought and effort that went into this project has been woefully understated, because it's evident from reading this blog post that the team really cared about it. Despite being highly susceptible to motion sickness himself, Tsurumi participated as a test subject and even prototyped a new camera to mitigate the problem. Eventually, they came up with a solution: present the action from a more distanced perspective and decrease Spyro's running speed, making the pace slower and the movements more gentle. Their hope was that this would help as many Japanese players as possible to enjoy Spyro the Dragon without getting nauseous. And Japanese is a key word here. With frivolous access to download this game all over the world, it's easy to forget, but this version was never made for us in the West to begin with. We could point and laugh without even attempting to understand the cultural context or reasoning behind these decisions. However, someone would have had to seriously think about them at one point in time. There's clearly intention behind every little detail. Take these dreaded signs, for example. Let's try to figure out why they're here. They are constantly derided as annoying and unnecessary by Western players, who rarely seem to consider the intended audience. The text is obviously in Japanese, that's our first clue, but keen-eyed viewers may notice that there are no kanji present, which would suggest that this localization was made with young children in mind. The signs might be more annoying to Westerners that don't even understand what they say, but it's not unreasonable to assume that a young Japanese player new to 3D exploration would find them quite useful. In fact, this kind of design is not uncommon in Japanese games, especially not at the time. In 1996, Sony of Japan, with the help of Tsurumi and his team, had already added similarly helpful hints in Naughty Dog's magnum opus, Crash Bandicoot, and would do so in every subsequent sequel under their watch. When the player picks up an Aku Aku mask, the Guardian Spirit will give out hot tips about how to play the game and conquer its devious challenges. It seems Naughty Dog themselves even liked the idea, and possibly took inspiration from it when making Crash Team Racing's very own Aku Aku hints appear in every region.
You can get a hang time turbo from jumping.
With the massive success of Crash Bandicoot in Japan, it makes sense that the same localization team would look back at their previous achievements when working on Spyro the Dragon. Placing tutorial opportunities all over the game may seem like a strange choice, but it's important to remember that there are vastly different design sensibilities at play here. In the West, we've come to favor a more hands-off approach these days. We often put a premium on games being subtle by teaching the player, quote-unquote, organically. And we don't care for big text boxes telling us what to do. In Japan, however, this is not necessarily true. This article by the localization team over at terralocalizations.com puts it rather bluntly. The written tips in Crash Bandicoot are not only common in games developed in Japan, but they are also expected by Japanese players. With this in mind, you'll probably notice similar systems in many of Crash and Spyro's contemporaries, such as Sonic Adventure's sparkly Tikal blobs, those happy hint blocks in Yoshi's Story, or the whackable post boxes in Ape Escape, which happens to be included as a demo disc with this version of Spyro the Dragon. Thanks! Even Spyro 2 Gateway to Glimmer would take after these sensibilities and introduced more overt tutorials, presented by characters stopping you dead in your tracks.
Hi, Spyro. I'm a friend of Alora's, and she's asked me to help you out. Whenever you find me,
Every Western gamer's nightmare. The strongest example is also the most obvious. Super Mario 64. In some ways, this hidden gem of a game even goes a step beyond the antics of Spyro and delivers mandatory text boxes at select points throughout the adventure. But what they have in common is much more interesting. As you may know, Princess Peach's castle and the game's many levels are riddled with signposts that give the players nifty tips and flavor text. The problems of our two heroes may differ slightly. One activates signs too easily, while the other requires needless precision. But the similarities are striking nonetheless. My point being that they aren't quite so different after all, and in the landscape of the late 90s, Spyro's Japanese release wasn't as out of place as some people would like to believe. In summary, these overt changes made to Spyro the Dragon, as perplexing and redundant as they may seem when taken out of context, were made in an attempt to adapt the game for a distinctly different audience than the initial Western one. With benefit of doubt, we can even look at these admittedly drastic choices as coherent in the pursuit to solve rather unique problems arising in the cultural clash. Through these measures, Spyro the Dragon was indeed relayed to Japan, produced, packaged, and sold in stores. But alas, Spyro didn't take the Japanese audience by storm. Despite all efforts, the game underperformed. And that was it. We could argue all day about whether or not these changes were justified, if they were quote-unquote good or not. It's the gamer's favorite pastime after all. But what this discussion really needs is more nuance, more meat on the bone. It needs people to be less confident about their preconceived notions and more willing to dig deeper than the surface. Most of all, we need to hear more Japanese perspectives on the matter. The discourse surrounding the Japanese version of Spyro the Dragon is oversaturated, and I mean dominated, by Western voices. This is not necessarily a problem. I mean, I'm one of them. But it does mean that the perspective is heavily skewed in one direction. The one that believes that their favorite childhood video game was ruined by heartless suits. I believe that these biases, in conjunction with the lack of Japanese voices, has led people to draw their own conclusions about the reception in Japan based on two disconnected facts. 1. The game was changed, and 2. The game flopped. There is an easy causal link to be drawn between the two. The game was changed, therefore the game flopped. But is that true? I don't mean to imply that it's absolutely false. I'm just asking. Everyone always assumes that the reception was bad based on poor sales. But does anyone even know what Japanese players and critics actually thought about Spyro the Dragon? Did anyone even think to ask? The idea that this game failed in Japan because everyone hated the changes is repeated so often that you probably would assume that it's based on something concrete. The Japanese audience must have thought it was a
Kusoge.
the same way we think it's shit. It was surely panned across the board for its garbage camera and stupid idiot signposts. They all hated it, and they Japanese even said it was the worst game they had ever had. Everyone believes this. But funnily enough, I have never seen any proof of it. No reviews, no comments, nothing. I believe part of the problem is that no one cares enough to find out what Japanese people thought about the game. Here's some insight from YouTuber Josh Call in his comment section.
I wonder how this version ranked with Famitsu. Lol.
That's an interesting thought. If I had to take a guess, I'd say badly.
Yeah, interesting thought. Luckily for us, though, we don't have to guess. Yosh! By fiddling around with the horrendous Google search engine and tinkering a bit with the Wayback Machine, we gained access to Famitsu's old review archive, and it turns out that Spyro the Dragon, as well as its sequel Spyro X Sparks Ton de Motors, got a score of 30 out of 40 in Famitsu's cross review, making them both Silver Hall of Fame titles. That's pretty good. Certainly not a dire showing for a new franchise from America. For a fun comparison, Crash Bandicoot apparently got a total of 28 with his debut game, beaten by only 2 points. Good job, Spyro. You did it. Yatta! We could leave it there, with big, juicy, positive numbers to back us up. But I don't know about you. I think we can do better than that. I am not satisfied. The point of this little exercise is not to dismiss the possibility of there being complaints about the Japan exclusive features. It's about having literally anything to reference, whether it be contrary or not. The review score is all well and good, but it's just a shame that we have no idea what was actually said in this cross review. I guess we'll never know. That's why we went ahead and bought the magazine, Weekly Famitsu issue 538, the one with Puffy and Miyumi on the cover. Remember them? Let's have a look. For anyone curious, Famitsu is the most famous weekly video game magazine in Japan, going strong even to this day. For a long time, the magazine was sort of mythologized in the West for its perceived authority on the medium and their relentlessly brutal review system that rarely, if ever, saw full scores being handed out. By the time they reviewed Spyro the Dragon, only one game had ever received a clean 40 out of 40 sweep during the magazine's 13 years in print. That game being Ocarina of Time a few months earlier. In that light, Spyro's humble final score of 30, consisting of 2 8s and 2 7s, doesn't look too shabby. The 4 critics were mostly positive, praising the beautiful graphics, the fairy tale aesthetics, and the elaborate characters. The first reviewer thought that Spyro's basic movement and gliding felt exceptionally great, while praising the game for not being as rough and awkward as most other Western titles. In similar fashion, the second reviewer called the atmosphere Crash-esque and remarked on how much fun it is to find your way to all of the hidden treasures in the levels. The third said that the game is fairly easy, with many save points and handy signposts, making it friendly for beginners to enjoy. The fourth and final critic appreciated the Western cartoon worlds of the game, cartoon being written in katakana for emphasis, and gave a nod towards the high quality of the Japanese voice acting as well. I'm sure that you're wondering, and yes, 2 of them did mention the camera. One saying that even though it can be a bit fiddly to manually adjust, you'll get a hang of it eventually, while the other, being more harsh, said that having to control the poor camera is cumbersome and breaks up the flow, making it the one downside of the game. Despite this blemish, it's fair to say that Famitsu were overall favorable towards Spyro the Dragon. Only one reviewer thought the camera was a big negative, and even then gave it a 7 regardless of that. Which isn't a bad score, by the way, no matter how gamer-brained you are. This is not to say that this criticism is irrelevant. In fact, I think it's interesting. There clearly is a sentiment here worth taking into account as we move on. And I hope I have managed to pique your curiosity by putting in all of this additional effort. Perhaps it inspires you. Maybe it gives you the thirst to find out more. That's great, because I am still not satisfied either. I think that we can do even better than this. That's why I got my hands on even more magazines. I want to take the opportunity to thank our friend Todd for helping us translate all the reviews cited in this video. While we're paraphrasing what was written, all text will still be presented in the original Japanese. If you want to have a closer look, we've scanned all relevant pages and made them available on archive.org for your viewing pleasure. Please, enjoy! Let's begin with this copy of Dengeki PlayStation issue 103, which includes 2 reviews for us to look at. The first reviewer found the characters charming and had fun exploring and discovering things in the game, but concluded that action fans might be disappointed because of lacking challenge. They also thought it was annoying having to control both the camera and the character at the same time, and noted that the camera movement in certain scenes could be tough on people who aren't used to 3D perspectives in games. Nevertheless, they gave the game a respectable 65 out of 100. Reviewer number 2 had kinder words to say and gave the game a total of 75 for its addictive exploration gameplay and the thrilling flight levels that mixes up the formula at just the right moments. People who hate to lose will also love it, presumably because of the low difficulty. Finding the silly enemies being up to shenanigans even without Spyro's involvement was also a highly appreciated detail. Moving on to the PlayStation issue 144, we're met with a somewhat intimidating score of 53 points. But the reviewer Mitsuaki is still surprisingly positive. The graphics are good, the fantastical setting is approachable, and the tempo is alright. They even call it a feel-good game that kids will probably have a great time with. However, adults on the other hand might find it a bit lacking. Conversely, Satoshi notes in his review that exploring and collecting hidden treasures is fun. The controls are easy to understand, Spyro has a variety of abilities to play around with, and the movement is smooth. Although, they did have some trouble with the camera's narrow field of view, making it harder for them to fully enjoy themselves. Apparently they also got motion sick while playing, but shrugged it off with a laugh and gave it a solid 71 out of 100. Editor-in-Chief Junpei Imamura is our final reviewer, and also the most positive with a final score of 78. He mainly praises the attention to detail and seems to be in love with how characters and objects interact to entertain the player. He then excitedly points out how Spyro spreads his crotch out when gliding, and ends by simply saying, "Great game!" I agree. The people over at Hyper PlayStation give us some more solid scores. Toda gave it a 9A and calls it a pleasure to play, emphasizing how fun it is to mess around as Spyro in the vast sandbox levels. They also expressed that the game is light on story, which means that everyone can play it. Although, it could be overwhelming for people that don't play a lot of video games. Faced with having to criticize anything, they say that there's a lack of motivation given to the player, and that it's hard to thoroughly make use of Spyro's wide array of moves. Tamari said that it's an exhilarating game that makes you use your head. In particular, they thought the gliding was wonderful and found the entire concept magnificent. The puzzle-like exploration to reach higher places to glide from made the game never feel like a chore. They even went so far as to say that Spyro is one of those rare games that would only work in 3D, distinguishing itself from other titles merely jumping on the bandwagon. Luckily, the camera not moving without input similar to Zelda also meant that they never felt motion sick either. For Tamari, the one detail barring Spyro from pure perfection is a more gripping story, giving it a 9B. Lastly, Kawauchimaru says that the game has a nice vibe, praising it for being colorful without cluttering the screen. The level design is solid, its difficulty is fair, and Spyro's abilities, including the gliding, works pretty well. Despite that, they feel something is missing that makes it hard to get into the game's sense of fun. But they concede that perhaps they expected too much, considering the developers' great efforts, which made them wish there was more to it, concluding with a score of 8A. Out of curiosity, I also took the opportunity to get my hands on Famitsu issue 588, which includes a review of the sequel, Spyro X Sparks Ton de Motors. Despite being a different panel of reviewers, they were still positive, giving it the exact same scores as the original Spyro the Dragon. The first critic calls it a fine successor, full packed with fun content that will take you plenty of hours to get through, The unique controls and camera movement can be tricky to get used to, but the game eases the player into it at a nice pace. The next one calls it simple fun and easy to grasp, especially if you haven't played many games before. The characters are expressive and the voice actors are great too. While the gimmicks and gameplay are somewhat average, it is still a well-made and entertaining video game. The third reviewer called it wonderfully easy to get into and fun for all ages, especially those who already enjoy the original. They even say that being able to quickly change the camera makes it less stressful for an action game. Our final critic praised the expressions and movements of the characters, calling them truly marvelous, and that it's just like watching a Disney anime. Adding that the game requires a lot of skill since you have to control both the character and the camera at the same time. So if you're new to action games, it might be a bit tough. And that's it. That's 16 reviews in total. 12 if you exclude our Spyro X Sparks detour. These professional reviewers provide us with an eclectic mix of scores and opinions that give us some insight into the reception of Spyro the Dragon. While not the biggest sample size in the world, it's certainly better than what everyone managed to fart out before. Which is to say, nothing. Nil. Here are all 12 scores for Spyro 1, sorted from lowest to highest, which gives us an average of 7.5 out of 10. Consensus seems to be that the game is good, but perhaps not exceptional. At worst, unremarkable. Even the lowest scoring reviews still found quality in the Purple Boy adventure, but their biggest gripe seems to be that it's simply too easy for adults to thoroughly enjoy. With Spyro 2 included, 8 out of the 16 reviews mentioned the camera in some way, which is a whopping 50%. We interpreted 3 of them as outright negative, 3 as neutral, and 2 as directly positive. By all means, you could look at this and come to your own conclusions, but in my opinion, you can't exactly call this a vicious backlash from the critics. The response is way too positive for that to be the case. So the narrative that Spyro the Dragon failed because of terrible reception doesn't seem to hold water. Mind you, these are only the voices of a handful of professional reviewers. Finding out what the general public thought at the time is a much harder task without extensive knowledge of the language and access to old forums. The one record we could find was this lonesome Usenet thread with no replies, created by poster Koshi Tamura, who bought the game a few days after release, and they seem to be enjoying themselves. Although, they do reveal that it made them nauseous in another unrelated thread. So, who knows? Other than that, Spyro the Dragon is only mentioned once, in passing, in a thread about Ocarina of Time. While this could be a reflection of how few people actually played it, and overall indifference of those who didn't, we wouldn't dare to conclude that this is everything there is to find. This is admittedly the biggest blind spot in our research, but I do still think there is something to the notion that this game was so insignificant that it barely garnered any discussion. And the few times it did, no one was particularly bothered by it. Even when we disregarded our focus on contemporary reception and broadened our search to find more recent perspectives, we've been hard-pressed to find anything remotely resembling the outright hostility found in the Western discourse. Instead of angry rants about one of the worst stinkers of all time, we found videos of players leisurely strolling through an old video game, seemingly having a good time.
なるほど。主にクライドで飛んでいく感じのスパイロコ。よくできました。ありがとうございます。このぐらいのテクニックはとても重要です。しっかりマスターしてください。はい、了解しました。
They're patiently collecting every single gem, reading all the signs for the viewers, and laughing about still getting beat up by a game that stomped them as a kid. It's not quite the outrage one would expect from a game everyone supposedly hates. The closest we got to touching the alleged controversy was this @wiki page, that attempts to catalog various video games. They meticulously document the version differences and refer to the camera controls as a negative for both Spyro the Dragon and the sequel. And yet, both of these games received the grace of a green stamp in this site's evaluation system. A good verdict. And I know for a fact that they didn't think it was a
Kusoge.
because they literally call other games that. If there genuinely was a harsh backlash against Spyro the Dragon in Japan, the legacy doesn't seem to reflect that. You could make the argument that it's been washed away by the tides of time. But I don't believe that to be true either. By all accounts, what we have here is a video game with a middling to positive reception, being painted in the worst possible light, based on nothing but assumptions. The notion that Japan hated this game is blatantly unfounded. Honestly, from what I gather, the critical reception in the West doesn't seem to be that far removed either. IGN gave it a 9 out of 10, GameSpot an 8.3. Meanwhile, the panel at Electronic Gaming Monthly gave it 8s and 9s. For some PlayStation bias, the official UK PlayStation magazine also gave it an 8, while our local Swedish magazine Superplay gave it a 90 out of 100. Of course, Edge magazine, ever the tricksters, gave it a cool 7 out of 10. It's safe to say that Spyro didn't rake in the 10s in his day, rather he hovered around a respectable 8. Granted, that's slightly above the Japanese reception, where the median was around a 7. But it's not exactly a night and day difference. On the whole, I think they enjoyed the game about as much as we did. So, where does that leave us? Why oh why, if Japan thought this game was completely fine, why didn't it succeed? The reasons for a high-profile game ending up underperforming are rarely uncomplicated. People love to form simple narratives to explain why video games don't do well, preferably with a single root cause and one basic answer. In this case, they changed the game and made it bad. Simple, clean-cut, case closed. I don't believe this to be true though, and the reviews and player reception we just looked at complicate that notion. It's interesting how the narratives contrast, how the tone and intensity differ compared to our current discourse. The perspectives aren't mired with the same biases. Surely different ones, but certainly not the same. When they criticize the camera, it may sound like the same criticism, but it isn't really the same criticism. The reviewers didn't approach the game with that attitude. They didn't judge it in terms of how the original was changed. There was no such baggage for them to wrestle with. That is to say that they weren't distracted by our sense of nostalgia, our resentment, and our preconceived notions. Looking at Spyro's success in America and Europe might give us the misguided impression that it would have inevitably done well in Japan too, if those meddling localizers hadn't gotten their dirty hands on it. It is, however, important to recognize that Japan is a vastly different market from those other territories, one with its own culture and demographics. That is to say that whatever works in one part of the world doesn't necessarily work in another, and vice versa. The truth is that Western games have always had a hard time establishing themselves in Japan. Crash Bandicoot may have been a great success, but he's more of an anomaly than anything else. His third installment was in fact the first Western-developed PlayStation game to ever hit 1 million units sold. In 2013, Famitsu published a list of the 100 best-selling games in Japan from 2001 to then present day, and only 2 were developed, at least in part, by Westerners. Both Nintendo games. I'm illustrating all of this to make the point that Spyro the Dragon was fighting an uphill battle from the very beginning, changed or not, and I believe that its perceived quality might not have mattered that much if the main character and gameplay wasn't massively appealing to an audience of Japanese children. Crash Bandicoot was given a theme song, performed a funny dance that anyone could participate in, and he lived in a tiny apartment together with his boyfriend, Parappa the Rapper. Watching all of the promotional material, I think it's easy to see why the orange marsupial in particular ended up working so well for kids in Japan. His game is simple to understand, he's goofy and fun in a way that perfectly fits the market, and the mascot suit was performed brilliantly to sell his character. In contrast, Spyro the Dragon is more complex to play. He doesn't quite fit the archetype of the indigenous Japanese dragon, and the mascot costume wasn't as prominently featured in adverts to convey his personality, even though it is adorable. This is just my interpretation though. I may very well be overestimating the issues the team had conveying Spyro's whole deal and the cultural importance of the mascot suit. But considering how they absolutely nailed it with Ratchet and Clank shortly afterwards, I believe I'm onto something here. If nothing else, it's pretty fun to think about. Going back to Tsurumi's old blog again for a moment, he says that while focusing on the problem of motion sickness, the localization team might have missed a bigger issue leading to Spyro's lack of success in Japan. Based on comments they received from players complaining about having trouble exploring the open spaces and the lack of a map to guide them, he theorized that Japanese people at the time may not have liked free-roaming exploration in 3D spaces quite as much as us in the West. Mind you, this is nothing but a theory, but it's certainly an interesting one that speaks to how differences in culture may reflect on what is popular or not. First-person shooters have, for example, famously done abysmally in Japan, whereas they've been among the most popular games available in other parts of the world. There are various reasons for this discrepancy as well, such as the historically niche market for PC games in Japan, and the previously mentioned issue of people being more prone to motion sickness. But perhaps Doom and other games of its ilk also didn't appeal to that particular audience because, as Tsurumi says, there was a lack of interest in 3D exploration. Simply paging through magazines from the time tells us a lot about the current trends, revealing to us plenty of rhythm games, simulators of different kinds, and not surprisingly, a cavalcade of Japanese RPGs. Like Saga Frontier 2. This is foreshadowing. Spyro also appears in these old magazines in adverts, previews, and guides with intricate maps. It's notable how several writers attempt to spark the reader's interest in this new foreign action game by mentioning Miyamoto-esque auteur figure, Mark Cerny, the quote-unquote creator of Crash Bandicoot. It's fair to say that they absolutely did try to sell Spyro to the readers, but it's not hard to see why he was eventually swamped by more high-profile Japanese games. Final Fantasy VIII was one of the best-selling PlayStation games in Japan, released just a few months before, and still takes up pages upon pages in all of these publications. Upcoming heavy hitter Dragon Quest VII is given grand, lavish previews that are sure to grab everyone's attention. Amyarmulami, the follow-up to the popular merchandise marvel Parappa the Rapper, is being covered extensively and scores big with the critics. Dance Dance Revolution is taking Japanese arcades by storm and is finally coming to the PlayStation a few days after Spyro the Dragon hits the market. And that's only scratching the surface. In every issue of Famitsu magazine, we find a weekly list tracking the best-selling video games in Japan. This is luckily one of the few staples of the publication that has been thoroughly documented to this very day, over on nichebarrier.com. Here, we can see that Spyro the Dragon was ranked number 17 and sold around 18,000 copies in its first week, beaten out by several established big sellers still going strong, like Densha the Go 2, Super Smash Bros., Final Fantasy VIII, and Amyarmulami. But let's focus on the new games competing for everyone's attention that week, all of which happen to release on the same exact day as Spyro. Kagayaku Kisetsue and Tokimeki Memorial Drama Series Volume 3 ranked 11 and 10 respectively, with sales right below the 30,000 mark. Sega Bass Fishing reels in the number 3 spot, while Power Pro Kun Pocket makes a swing for second place. However, they're all dwarfed by the release of Saga Frontier 2, with a whopping 400,000 copies in its first week, outselling Spyro the Dragon by over 20 times. Next week, the newly released Dance Dance Revolution is topping the charts, while Spyro the Dragon is nowhere to be found. By the end of the year, the sales numbers are updated one last time, and it's reported to have sold 56,000 copies. Which, honestly, isn't even the worst performance for a Western game in Japan. However, by the time Spyro 2 hits the Japanese market in March of 2000, our purple boy doesn't even manage to make the ranking, presumably selling less than the lowest charted game's meager 5,000 copies in its first week. And that's in spite of Spyro 2 being the highest rated game in its issue of Famitsu, once more earning the Silver Hall of Fame title and being mentioned by all 4 reviewers in the Pick of the Week column. Instead, this week is occupied by the PlayStation 2 launch title Ridge Racer 5 and the continued success of national phenomenon, and you might have heard about this one before, Pokemon Gold and Silver. Poor Spyro, figuratively bullied in all directions. Though it was the year of the dragon, it wasn't a dragon's world for him. With all of this information in mind, what's popular at the time, how hard it is for Western games to break into the market, the review scores given to the game, as well as the sales numbers, we might be able to draw some conclusions here. Based on everything we've talked about, I don't get the impression that the problem was so much that Spyro the Dragon sucked big time, but rather, more disastrously, that no one even cared. It's perfectly reasonable to me, and I hope you all are willing to consider the possibility that this Western video game was of acceptable quality, was received moderately well, and that it failed commercially despite being good. We have to wrestle with the potential scenario where releasing it unaltered wouldn't have helped its chances of success significantly, if at all. Many have already proclaimed Spyro's lack of success intrinsically tied to the changes made to it. Some of you are probably writing it in a comment right now, but I think this is clearly missing the full picture. At base level, you simply needed someone to look at this cover in a store and decide to buy it. But they didn't. It all comes back to the surface level issue of not being appealing to a Japanese audience in a highly competitive market that already doesn't favor Western releases. Whether good or bad, no one actually cared about Spyro the Dragon. Sometimes, it just so happens that good games fail to meet the cruel expectations of the raucous machine that churns them out. There are many such cases in Japan alone. Did you know that they never saw the original releases of Gex Free, Jak Free, Sly Free, Rayman Free, or even Bubsy 3D? That's a lot of frees. Spyro Free likewise never saw a Japanese release, and while previous sales probably were a big reason, I can't imagine its chances were helped by the dominant presence of the PlayStation 2, Insomniac's departure from Universal, and Sony's subsequent decision to back the developer's next project instead. I'm sure you can think of similar cases of Japanese games from the time not releasing in Europe or America. To stay on the theme of freeze, the third Jumping Flash game, Robit Mon Dieu, comes to mind. For those of us who bothered importing it, this is arguably the best in the series. But I'm sure as hell not gonna cry about never getting it as a kid. Chances are that I wouldn't have gotten it anyway, because I had other games to play. like Spyro 2, Gateway to Glimmer. That's why it's so off-putting to find all of these comments from people performatively feeling bad on the behalf of figurative Japanese kids who didn't get to experience the glorious third game in the Spyro series, or the real Spyro the Dragon for that matter. It's weird to me. Genuinely weird behavior. These comments are presented as thoughtful of others, but I believe they're quite self-centered in an unintentional way. It's this same strange, nostalgic self-aggrandizing of childhood that you often see in memes lamenting that other children don't get to consume the same exact media as you did, but without the generational gap. It assumes our pre-adolescent experiences to be fundamental not only to ourselves, but everyone else, to the point where we should feel sorry for them for not being us.
When I was a kid, we drank Spyro directly from the hose, and those poor bastards would never know what it was like.
I can assure you though, people from the other side of the world growing up in the 90s didn't have a worse childhood because they were deprived of your favorite video game. They had favorites of their own. They played different games, watched different cartoons, and listened to different music. I mean, when was the last time you played through Saga Frontier 2? Real juggernaut in the Spyro community, I hear. Quite frankly, the children of Japan did not need to experience Spyro the Dragon. And yet, a few of them did. They may not have played it the exact same way that you're used to, but it was Spyro the Dragon to them, regardless. For their sake, we must imagine them divorced from our personal grievances and acknowledge that they too may have enjoyed a video game in similar ways that we did, despite the apparent differences that bother you. When looking at the Japanese version, we tend to only focus on the obvious contrasts. We only see the changes until nothing else matters. We end up blind to everything that remained the same. However, the critics of the magazines we looked at could clearly express what makes this game special beyond the basic movement mechanics, why it sticks out to a lot of people as quote-unquote good. The kind of shit that we fell in love with too. The fairy tale aesthetics, exploring colorful open worlds, the attention to detail, all those quirky enemies, the fun of collecting thousands of bobbins, and of course, how Spyro airs his crotch out when he glides. This is the stuff that really matters, man! It's not surprising then that you can easily find videos of Japanese people playing the game, with comments underneath, reminiscing about their childhood experiences, exclaiming similar feelings of nostalgia for an adventure long since faded into memory. It might not have been a big hit in Japan, but it clearly touched the hearts of some people. And in that sense, I don't think our experiences were that different.
Japanese Spyro the Dragon PS1 import. A gift from my sister. I had some issues with the case that came with the game. Broken/crooked top half was coming off by itself, but I was able to buy a new case and replace it just fine. Looks stunning.
You hate your sister that much?
I don't particularly care if you dislike this version of Spyro the Dragon. But I will say though, I think this is shit to me. I am sick and tired of the over-exaggerated responses, the constant disregard of other people, and the smug lack of curiosity. Why are you all being like this? Why do you need to hop in with a reminder that the Japanese version is awful and ruin the game every single time anyone mentions it? You're not being smart or witty, you're just a sheep. I have heard enough of self-proclaimed funny guys on YouTube regurgitate the same old tired opinions with nothing new of value to add to this conversation. I don't want to see another channel called The Gaming Potato be pretend forced by an evil doppelganger to play a video game that they never wanted to play. and have already predisposed themselves to dislike. You want the camera to move for you? What do you think this is? Communism? I wish. I don't think it's funny, even for a joke, to imply that the localization team were mentally disabled for making changes that you, personally, did not jive with 20 years later. In fact, looking back at a video game that clearly wasn't made for you with more than 2 decades of hindsight and dismissing the developers' troubles and treating them like they're stupid idiots, doesn't make you clever. It makes you an asshole. No one bothers to do the bare minimum amount of research. Everyone repeats vague information that they've heard from someone else, who heard it from someone else, who heard it from someone else. I have noticed that there's a palpable lack of care in these productions, because in truth, the game is inconsequential. For the purposes of entertainment, anything can be made into a spectacle, constructed to be bad for an audience to laugh at. It's simply fun, fulfilling, and most of all, easy to have a target that no one will defend. So I will. I genuinely believe that the Japanese version is perfectly enjoyable. It's good. Certainly a far cry from the unplayable abomination that some people want to make it out to be. While the camera could be tricky for beginners to master, I have to emphasize that it shouldn't be a problem for anyone who's even slightly more proficient with 3D action games on the PlayStation. Unlike his older brother, Crash Bandicoot, Spyro the Dragon doesn't involve a lot of tough platforming challenges, and instead focuses on relaxed exploration in big open spaces. The slower pace and low difficulty works well together with the deliberate camera maneuvering, and makes for a breezily cozy experience. I wouldn't even say that I had a remarkably worse time playing this compared to what I'm already used to, because at the end of the day, this is still Spyro the Dragon to me. Coincidentally, the best game ever made. Despite the changes, the quality is still so high that I have a hard time taking everyone's tiresome winching as anything but hyperbole. You're really telling me that this is the worst dreck that the original PlayStation has to offer? Sounds to me that some of y'all need to dive a little bit deeper and play some real putrid stinkers to get some perspective. And I'm not talking about Bubsy 3D. That one's good. Yeah, I said it. What are you gonna do about it, bitch? You're gonna come into my comment section and tell me I'm Spyro the Dragon is a delightful 3D platformer with colorful fantasy worlds to roam around, all filled with memorable characters and glowing bobbins to collect. Spyro and the rest of his friends are all lovingly brought to life by several prolific voice actors that you might know from popular shows such as One Piece, among many others. The game is not only graphically impressive, but also aesthetically gorgeous, and the catchy music gives the realms a uniquely magical atmosphere. Most of all, it's satisfying to run around exploring these worlds in search of treasure and mischief to engage in. And that's regardless of how slow you perceive the main character to be. What's the damn hurry anyway? Slow down for once, take it easy, and absorb the sights and sounds. Let's be real, you're not a speedrunner, Jeremy, and even if you were, it's not like you'd be playing this version to get your latest PB in 120%. If you can't beat this game under precisely 3 hours while drunk off your ass on sake bombs, like double world record holder Deoman definitely did, then you should shut your goddamn mouth.
Yatta! Yatta! Ah! Yatta!
I would love to change people's minds on this matter. However, I know that I can't convince everyone that this maligned classic is good. Even though that would be nice. What I want, at the very least, is to encourage everyone to see beyond themselves. Imagine a person who does enjoy it, and by doing so, find value in it for yourselves. Whatever that may be. perhaps there are more interesting ways to engage with this video game anomaly other than declaring its inherent quality as being shit. In merely examining these claims, I fell down a rabbit hole of how culture affects localization, publication, reception, and legacy. By not feeding the closed loop of negativity, we may even broaden our horizons and learn something. If this is true for something as insignificant as a specific version of Spyro the Dragon, then surely it must apply broadly and urgently to other aspects of life as well. I want you all to be curious and inquisitive. When you hear someone state a commonly believed fact without presenting a source, it's worth questioning where they got it from, regardless if it's true or not. It's an uncomfortable reality that a lot of us just repeat things that we've heard from other people. I've probably done it too. I've definitely done it too. Did your favorite YouTuber find a source for the infamous claim that Miyamoto bursted into Rareware's offices and forced them to change Dinosaur Planet into Star Fox Adventures? Or did they hear it from Jontron and thought it was a good bit, funny enough to steal? I can just imagine it. Miyamoto bursting into Rareware's offices and said, "You got a fox," without being too judgmental. I think this is a good opportunity for you to do some digging. The original Super Mario Bros. 2 is well known for having been changed in the West due to its staggering difficulty. But did you know that the Wikipedia source for this claim is a 15-year-old article from IGN that in turn doesn't cite any sources? Can you believe it? You could of course just take this at face value and accept it as a known fact. But you could also turn around and do some sleuthing of your own to find out where it actually came from. I will leave that mystery up to you. This is not to say that everyone needs to write a dissertation and import a pile of magazines whenever they want to make a silly YouTube video about a shitty video game. But perhaps it's okay to expect the bare minimum. There's usually more to a story than what smarmy YouTubers and self-proclaimed unbiased gamers with aspirations of being angry nerds would have you believe. When games are constructed into metaphorical punching bags, we could all benefit from being skeptical enough to question the narratives that demanded it so. It's interesting to think about how our preconceived notions, our established understandings, could inform our perspectives so much, making a shining gem like Spyro the Dragon appear to be anything but. And that's all I got for you today. Hopefully, we can be more open to explore video game culture from viewpoints we aren't familiar with in the future, and celebrate them with sincerity. Thank you. If you like this video, please consider supporting us on Patreon. If you do, you get access to our Discord, get some cool audio companions, and a lot more behind the scenes stuff and whatever else you think is cool. You also get your name in the credits, like these lovely people do. Acid Shark, All Purpose Nobody, Afayette, Bibi the Bitch, Colorado Hugge, Dave Pickett, Dr. Puntgusher Esquire, Eden Senta, Harper, Intungeon, Joy Content, Klaus Morals, Madeline Machado, Matthias Graman, Meowmix64, Mr. Talius, Mosling, Niako, Nishsvert, Paperlanti, Passion Tentacle, Sarah Bloomer, Saxon, Shonal McDoodle, Synchronize, TB Skyan, Jammy Shaggy, OneSplee16, Abs and Odd, Ali, Anna Day, Anonymous, Aria Soria, Arai, Bad Wolfos, BK Flash, Blues Piranha, Botch Frivarg, Charles Goldhaber, Chloe, Comfy Feline, Consult the Bones, LED Mox, Elliot Diebold, Emmy Murphy, Eric Hamilton Schneider, Evelyn, Friend of Dracula, Fungal, Henrik, Hope, Ina Encina, Indigo Trans, Ingrid, JIR Not, Jaeon Young, J Mission, Jellygod, Jennifer, Kadaf, Knave, El Tantivi, Luke Dixon, Maddie Madkip, Mark Mahan, Mitch Haley, Neuropain, Nerbion, Quasar Nebula, Rocky Disco, Sean Wolfbark, Silkmoth, Silly Rookie, Skyhoppers, Sleepy, Sleepy Slug, Surashu, That Queer Birdman, Tiny Sam, and VG. We'd also like to welcome Bea Bernay, Colorful Cast, Dustin Reno, Jose Rangel, Sam Mayers, and Tyler Moyer. Thanks everyone for sticking with us while we make silly videos like this one. That's it. Go home. We're done here. I don't have anything fun to say. I told you.